Hello, welcome to beautiful sunny Florida. Today what we're going to do is give you some pointers and some tips and show you how to photogam a boat. So first off, it's very key that the targets do not move whatsoever. So if you're coming onto a boat and maybe it's wet or damp and maybe early in the morning, you need to make sure you mop the boat. Make sure you get it good and clean and dry. The issue is if you don't get it dry and you lay the targets down, the targets can possibly move, and it's very, very important that the targets do not move. So it's imperative that you get the boat nice and clean prior to starting the photogamming process. Alright, now what we're going to talk about is the supplies you need to properly photogam a boat. You're going to have your big targets, and then you're also going to have your smaller targets. We'll show you where you're going to use these targets and how to properly use them. As we discussed, you're also going to want a mop so that you can clean off the surface and make sure the surface is nice and dry. The other most important thing is you're going to have your squares. These squares are going to be in 4 different sizes. I'll show you how to lay these out properly so that you can get a perfect fit every single time. The other thing you're going to need is straight edge. The straight edge is very important when you're doing overhangs and things so that you can draw lines. We'll actually also show you how to properly do this. Another important thing is blue tape. Now it's very important on the blue tape to get the original blue Scotch tape. Do not get any of the fine edge tape because it actually won't properly stick to the gel coat and it'll cause you a lot of problems. Next thing is a measuring tape. We'll show you how to use that and what you're going to use that for. And then the other thing I like to carry is a nice box of Sharpie markers. Obviously you're on a boat, you want to be extremely careful with these, but it is very important that you have a Sharpie marker ready for your disposal. And then the last thing is your camera, and then you'll be ready to go. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and start laying out our targets. The first thing we want to do is use our L's, and it's very important to lay these out in a certain manner. So in this boat we're going to do this whole rear section. We're also going to do this front section. We're going to add some other parts to it, but for now we're going to go ahead and lay out these 2 sections. What I want to do is I want to put these L brackets at all 4 corners. So I'm going to place it on the back of the boat here. I'm going to place my next one back here. And then I'm going to move up to the aft section of the boat. And I'm going to place another one over here in this corner. And then a final one over in this corner. This is going to give me all 4 areas and give us a good way to properly photogam this boat. So each of these targets, it's very important that they're laid in a unique manner. Now what I want you to notice is if you take a look at the non-skid here, we have smooth surface here, we have smooth surface here, we have smooth surfaces around here. It's imperative that these targets don't go on those smooth surfaces if you don't need them to. Now there's some situations where you're going to have to actually use them in overhang, and I'll show you when you're going to have to do that here shortly. So I'm going to just start laying out the targets in a unique manner. Now the key to laying out the targets is, as we discussed before, you cannot touch these targets whatsoever. So you have to think about where you're laying them out, and you got to make sure that you lay them out in a manner that you can walk properly around them without touching them. Another really important process in this whole thing is I'm a big believer in not wearing shoes on a boat no matter what, but if you're at a boat company or you're somewhere where there's a lot of dirt and debris and stuff, I recommend you wear socks, because once you wear socks or you don't wear any shoes at all, then if you accidentally hit one of those targets, you're gonna know. Alright guys, we got a lot of our targets down. Now the question is why did we do it the way we did it? As I previously mentioned to you, what I like to do is make sure that you give yourself enough space that you can walk around, okay? When you're laying out your targets, if you see a target and you don't like the way it is, you can adjust that. You just cannot move the targets once you start the project. So what I like to do is walk around and see how I've laid out on my targets and double check they're correct. Now the key to this is in every picture you want at least 6 targets in the picture. So what you're going to do is you're going to lay them out in a manner to assure that you have 6 targets, but again, giving you enough room to walk around. So what I've done is for example here, I've laid out my targets in an elongated manner up against the non-skid. Now what you don't want to do is as you see this line, you do not want to be touching the line. You want to be further back away from the line. The reason being is when we're going to take the photos, what we want to make sure we can do and see in the photos is the actual line. So don't run it all the way up to the line. Give us a nice little space away from the line so that we can actually see that. Also, what you can do is you can actually lay them out in different ways. So you can do them vertically, horizontally, and kind of mix it up, because that actually helps the processes when they're kind of changed around. Now this is a great example, and this is how you need to be unique with your targets. So for example, over here we have a really small step. Also, as you see, it is underneath a tight overhang. So what I like to do in these situations is stack the targets, put a lot of targets in there, because as you're trying to take pictures under there and trying to move it around, the more targets you can have underneath there, the easier it is for the computer system to pick up on those. All right, so what we've done now is we've laid out all of our bigger targets. Next, we're gonna move to our smaller targets. These are gonna be for a lot tighter places is what these are gonna be used for. So another thing that I want you to also notice that we're gonna actually start patterning is an area that's doesn't have any non-skid whatsoever. You can pattern different areas that don't have non-skid if it's gonna look good for the design purposes. So for example, in this boat, we've laid out all of our targets around our non-skid, but I think that it'd look really nice if we did this smooth area up here. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna actually lay out our small targets in a unique manner that we can actually pattern this as well. So let me show you. Okay, in this section, as you see, it's kind of skinny here. What we don't wanna do is we don't wanna lay targets in the skinny manner. The reason is the computer system will not pick it up. So what we want to do is we want to elongate them to give us the maximum distance, and then every once in a while we can do a side just like that. So I like to do about every 3, and then I'll go to the side. Now above this bracket you can go like this, but in these smaller areas I like to really put a lot of targets down, and that helps the design team when they're going and processing the photos to get a more accurate shot. All right, so as we're shooting, there's some key things that you need to know. In the frame of your picture, if you're walking around edges or you're going to the non-skid surface, you want to make sure you're capturing that in the photo. So for example, you have an overhang here. If I was to just shoot up here, there's a good chance that I can't see that edge. So what I want to do is I can shoot across this edge here and not capture it, but I want to come back and I want to constantly take pictures around to ensure I'm seeing that edge, so that the designers can see the way they need to actually place the line and actually capture the piece and design it properly. All right, I'm ready to go. I'm ready to start shooting. So I'm gonna actually start back here, and I like to start where there's an L bracket. As we further discuss, we have L brackets in all 4 corners. So I'm gonna start at this L bracket, and then I'm gonna start moving in a zigzag pattern. I'm gonna make sure that I take tons of pictures. I'm gonna make sure that they're overlapping pictures. The key to this is you cannot take too many pictures, but you can take not enough pictures. So feel free to overdo it. Make sure you have a big SD card, and then you can load it up. So let's get started. As you see, I'm not moving much at all from frame to frame. I'm doing that all at the same time to be especially careful that I'm not touching a target. So I'm just clicking, clicking. As you see, I'm not moving the camera much. I'm just making sure that I get plenty of pictures and plenty of targets in a single picture. Now let's say I'm moving around and I touch this target. I felt it with my foot, so I know that that target is now going to move. So the key to this is lean down, pick up the target, and just put it in your pocket. If you touch a target and you don't pick it up and put it in your pocket and it moves, it's going to throw off the whole project, and that is not good. So make sure you pick up the target if you accidentally touch it. Let's keep shooting. as we move from the aft of the boat to the bow of the boat, what we want to do is obviously you see we have steps and we have different transitions. The key to this is we want to make sure we capture exactly where that transition is. A lot of times you'll see the beautiful teak lines won't exactly be straight. But if we make sure that our parts are exactly where they need to be, we can make those teak lines nice and straight or the diamonds nice and straight. So when I'm capturing these photos, what I want to do is I want to make sure that I'm coming high where I can see the aft section, I can see these steps, but then I also can see this section. That way all the targets can interconnect with one another, and then that way we can actually see that transition. So when we're developing this aft piece, we can know exactly where these pieces need to be, and we can make sure that our plank lines are nice and straight, or any other design that we have coincides with the way the pieces lay on the boat. All right, now we're back on the swim step. As you see, we've taken up all the targets from the aft deck and the midship. Now what we're gonna do is we're gonna start this as a new project. So there's a couple ways to do it. Option A is take my camera, take a picture of my hand, so the very next couple pictures is gonna be a picture of my hand. That's gonna tell the design team that you've picked up the targets and now you've moved them to another location. Or what you can do is you can just set up a new file when you're actually creating the file to upload it, which we'll talk about later, and you can just make that a separate project as well. All right, so one important thing to notice on this boat is we have these through bolts through here. Now what a lot of people will try to do is just pattern this, and they'll take the material and they'll go right over the bolts. Now that is not the right way to do it. We are a custom marine flooring manufacturer, and we want this to last. We want it to have the longevity it needs. So what we want to do is we want to actually pattern around these, okay? As you see, there's a lip. If we would have taken our material and gone right over, what that's going to do is create an air void. That air void will slowly get worse over time, and then the customer will start having issues. So again, we're going to go around it. The key to it is when we're laying our targets out, we do not go over those so that our design team can see those bolts. So we're just going to place them around so that our design team can see those bolt holes every time. Now there is going to be a few situations where you are going to want to cover up heads of screws. Sometimes your center hatches and stuff will have a smooth head, and it may be right in the middle of the hatch, and you don't want to go over that. You want to cover it up because it's nice and smooth. In that case, take your target, place it directly over it. If your target's nice and smooth, then leave the target down and start shooting. That way our design team doesn't even know the screw head's there, and that gives us instructions to go ahead and cover it up. All right, since we've started a new project, we want to still use our L brackets. Now you can use these as just regular targets. So in case I have 4 of them, I want to cover up a lot of area. But again, I want to place these targets on the edges, just like I did before. But you can go ahead and use them in other areas. Just make sure that you have them in every new project you do. If you don't have them in the new project, that doesn't allow us to give you that perfect fit that you're looking for. Also, when you're doing this, make sure you don't fall in the water. And now we're ready to shoot. On swim steps, one common mistake that a lot of people do is they'll just run down the swim step with the camera this direction. They won't go the other direction. Again, you want to use multiple different angles of the camera. So what I like to do is run down with my angle this way, and then I'm going to do it long ways as well. Just again, make sure you take a lot of pictures, and you make the pictures very tight against each other. And in this situation, I'm going to flip the camera completely upside down, and basically I'm going to take the picture backwards. So that way, I've basically taken 3 different angles of the same platform. Now what we're working on is our gunwale pads. Now, as you see, you've got your fish rod holders here. There's 2 ways to do this. A lot of people, what they want to do is they want to just pattern the whole section, maybe run a tape measure, figure out the angles and everything needed, and basically submit it that way. And then what they'll do is they'll unscrew the rod holders and they'll screw it all the way through the material and sandwich it. I don't like doing that. I don't really like dismantling people's boats if I don't have to. So I also like to give it that custom look. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually photogam it. And again, just like the top of the gunnels, you have to do them in a unique manner. Now, obviously, we're at a vertical surface, and these aren't going to work on a vertical surface. Again, this is where your blue tape is going to come about. This process can take you a little bit of time, but I just roll my blue tape, put it on the back, and then I start putting them up. Now, this same technique is used on footrest. A lot of center consoles will have an angle footrest that you're obviously going to want to shoot in your project as well. The easiest way to do that is, again, this blue tape method, where you just stick it so that way they stay up there. Just like on the floor, obviously you don't want them to move, so make sure you stick them real good. Make sure the area is dry and clean so that you get good adhesion, and just start posting them up. Then once we post them up, then we can just start shooting it. Alright, so now we've gotten all of our targets up on our gun walls. Now, like I said, a lot of people will just take a tape measure and angle these things out, and what happens is a lot of times they'll actually make them too small. So what I like to do is no matter where you're standing in the boat, I like it to look like your gun wall pad is completely seamless. So what I do when I pattern is I actually run my targets way up to the upper ridge, and when I'm taking my photos, I make sure that I capture that. So what I try to do is cover the maximum distance here, because nothing's worse than standing on one side of the boat and you just see that, hey, your gunwale pad just stopped. It just doesn't look custom. It's not as unique. So again, I try to give it maximum coverage. The other important thing to do is when you're doing that, you want to make sure you run your blue tape line along the bottom, because obviously there's a roll, and since we're working on a fine line, we want to make sure that we can see that line. Again, when we pattern through the photogrammetry process, we're going to go around your rod holders so you won't have to mess with them when you go install the material. So all now we have to do is start shooting, and we're ready to go. As we're shooting, again, you want to get way up underneath there. So you want to lay down and you want to get up underneath and get a lot of pictures. All right, a lot of times what you're gonna do is run into overhangs. A lot of times the overhangs are really, really shallow where you can actually not get your camera down to take a photo. Now this boat has a pretty tall overhang, but I wanna show you what you're gonna do is if that overhang is really low and you can't actually see this back line of the non-skid. So what we're gonna do here is this is where we're gonna use our blue tape. We're gonna actually take our blue tape and we're gonna actually follow the line and we're gonna look down and basically line it up with where the overhang is. Now what I like to do is I like to kind of double up the tape so that I have a much wider surface. I'm gonna just set that out just like that. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna create a false line. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna actually take my square, I'm gonna put it here and I'm gonna make sure that I have it where I can actually mark on the blue tape. So I'm good, I can mark on the blue tape. So what I wanna do is I wanna just take a straight edge and basically I'm gonna create a false line. So I'm gonna take this and I'm gonna just make some marks. Again, you're using a Sharpie in a boat, not always very exciting, but if you'll be really careful, you won't have any problem. So again, this is where it's really important that you have a straight edge, you try to line that up. I just make some markings like that. And then I'm ready for the next step. Now what we're gonna do is we're gonna tell the design team where this false line is actually starting at. So I'm gonna take my measuring tape and I'm gonna actually look at where my non-skid brake is. I'm gonna take my non-skid brake. So for example, and we hit it really, really closely, but that is exactly 2 inches. That line is 2 inches from that non-skid line. What I'm then gonna do is I'm gonna mark a vertical line and I'm gonna say 2 inches. So what's gonna happen is when I lay my targets out here in a few minutes and I take pictures, our design team's gonna be able to see that line and they're gonna create the false line, but then they're gonna move it forward 2 inches and that way they know that that's where it stops and that's how you overcome really, really shallow overhangs. So let's continue the process. And so for example, that one is 2 1/8 inch. So I'm gonna mark it 2 1/8. And it's all right if it's not completely the same because there, with the information, the design team's gonna be able to see. This one is 2 1/4 inches. Two 3/8 inch. And 2 3/8 inch. So now what I want to do is when I'm laying out my targets, I'm going to actually take my targets and I'm going to run them up close to here. I'm not going to go back there because there's no point, no need to go back there. So I'm going to just lay them out around there. And that way when I go shoot my pictures, then I'm gonna be able to see the line and then the computer and the design team will be able to move that line to where it needs to go. So that's how you overcome really, really shallow overhangs. All right, so the next step is to do the top of the gunnels. Now these can be extremely, extremely tricky, so really pay close attention on how I lay the targets out. Also in this section, you're gonna actually see where I'm gonna actually take a target, I'm gonna go outside the non-skid line, and this is gonna apply to other sections of boats as well, but you'll understand the concept once I start this. So I've gone on ahead and laid out the top of the gunnel here. Now this is a pretty wide gunnel, so it makes it a lot easier, but as you see when I lay out the targets, they're extremely close to each other and they're also in a unique manner. I'm going vertically, double horizontal, vertically, double horizontal, vertically, and moving all the way down. Make sure you lay your targets out like this. Now what I want to show you also is I've also implemented some small targets to take some really finite areas. So for example, around this rod holder, as you see, I've taken 2 small targets and I've come outside that non-skid line. Now you can do that as long as I can see that that's a straight line from bottom to top. I've done that over here. So my design team can actually see that that's still a straight line, and that helps position that rod holder to where it needs to be. As we move up towards the bow of the boat, I've done the same exact thing. Now, what the key is as you see, the design team can see that's a straight line all the way across. What I don't want to do is do that, because they cannot see that curvature, so I want to make sure that that's slid all the way in so that they can see that straight line. Again, that helps us position that tower foot where it needs to be, and I've used that same concept all the way back here to the back of the boat. So depending on the size of the gunnels, depends on if you can use the big targets or the small targets. A lot of times you have to use the small targets because you don't have the room for the big targets. However, lay your small targets out in the same exact manner I've done up here, and you'll be off to the races. All right, now we're inside the cabin doing the final project of the day. So one thing that I want to mention, and what you'll notice is you are perfectly fine implementing the big targets and the small targets all in the same project. So if you get into a real tight space that you need to use a small target, go ahead, it's not hurting anything at all. So as you see, I've laid out my big targets, my small targets, making sure my L brackets on this project, so we're ready to shoot. Again, just like we did those steps coming from the aft ship to the midship, we want to make sure we capture all 3 of these steps all in one picture. So I may have to climb out of the galley, take some pictures down, because again, it's important that we want to try to make our design cohesive throughout all of the steps. So let's get to shooting. So one thing I want you to notice is we have this basket over here on the side. Now I could use the tape method, but I also feel like I have enough gap that I can get my picture taken underneath, so I'm gonna just make sure I get down. Now the key when you're doing these tight angle shots is you wanna make sure A, you take tons of pictures, but B, that you get as many targets as possible in it. So it's perfectly fine to take pictures at angles. Sometimes you're gonna have to do that on top of dashes where it may get really close and tight with the windshield. So just make sure that when you're capturing it, that you can see the top of the target, and therefore the computer system can pick up on the job. All done. All right guys, thanks for enjoying the day with us. We have photo gammed this boat. We're off to the next process. We're super excited for this customer. We're glad you joined us today. If you have any questions or anything, get with your local rep and we'll be glad to get you taken care of.